Don't get up. Don't you dare smile at me like we're going to have a pleasant little chat, because we are not. I want to know what you think you're doing to my son. A C-. My Eli, a C- in English, a subject I could teach in my sleep. And that's not a thing that happens, not in this family, not with a real teacher in the room. So I sat with it. I sat with it all weekend. And I came to the only thing that makes sense, which is that the problem isn't my son. The problem is standing right in front of me.
Mrs. Whitfield, I'm glad you came in. Eli is a thoughtful kid, and there are some things I'd genuinely like to talk through with you. Things that...
No. No, you don't get to redirect. I've watched people like you do that. Deflect, deflect, deflect. Let me be very clear about who you're talking to, because I don't think you've done your homework, teacher. I sit on the school board. I have given this district more money than you will earn in a decade.
And I am going to make it my personal mission to find out whether you are even remotely qualified to be in a room with children like mine. Because everything in me says you are not. So, care to explain yourself? Or should I just go straight to the superintendent? Who, by the way, has my cell number. And the woman she was saying it to, Camille Foster, 48 years old, 24 years a teacher, who had taught English to roughly 3,000 children before she ever set foot in Brookhaven, who had a master's degree and a wall of certifications in a box she hadn't bothered to hang yet, standing behind her own desk in her own classroom with a stack of her students' essays under her hand, looked at Margot Whitfield for a long, quiet moment. And here is the thing you need to understand about that moment, because the entire story lives inside it. Camille Foster knew exactly why Eli Whitfield had a C-. She knew better than anyone alive. She knew it had nothing to do with English, and everything to do with a 12-year-old boy who had stopped raising his hand in October, who ate lunch alone in the second-floor stairwell where he thought no one could see him, whose last 3 essays had each, in their own careful, hidden, heartbreaking way, been about a boy nobody noticed. Camille could have ended this conversation in one sentence. She could have wiped that contempt off Margot Whitfield's face in 5 seconds flat with the truth about her son. It would have saved her. It would have been so easy. She didn't. She wouldn't. Because the boy's pain was the boy's. And you do not spend a child to save yourself. Not ever. That was the first law and the last one. And so Camille Foster swallowed it the way she had swallowed it for 24 years. And she said only evenly, "I'd love for us to sit down together, you, me, and Eli, and talk about how he's doing. Not the grade. Him. Whenever you're ready, Mrs. Whitfield, my door is open." My son is times fine. Margot said it like a slap. My son is times perfect. The only problem in this classroom is you. She'd swallowed it before. She'd swallow it again. It was the part of the job nobody warned you about in the teaching programs, that a certain kind of parent, when their child was hurting in a way they couldn't see, would come looking for someone to blame, and would look at the color of your skin and the name of your last school and decide, before you'd said a word, that they'd found her. Camille Foster had made her peace with it a long time ago, or thought she had. What Margot Whitfield did not know, what nobody in that bright, quiet classroom knew. Not the furious woman. Not the teacher protecting a secret that was costing her everything. Not the boy himself. Sitting 2 floors up in a stairwell with a sandwich he wasn't eating was that in 2 weeks. Margot Whitfield would be standing at a microphone she had personally demanded. In a packed boardroom she had personally filled, ready to end this woman's career in front of the entire town. And she would get exactly halfway through, and then her own 12-year-old son would stand up in the 3rd row and ask to speak and tell the truth. But first, let me take you back to where this began. Because to understand how a powerful woman ended up being undone in public by her own child and to understand why the only person in that town who'd truly seen that child was the woman she was trying to destroy, you have to go back about 2 months to a new teacher's first quiet weeks in a school that didn't want her. And you have to know exactly who Camille Foster was. The whole thing turns on that. Camille Foster came to Brookhaven the way a lot of good teachers come to places like Brookhaven, because the place she loved had been taken from her. For 23 years, she had taught at East Side Middle, downtown. The school Margot Whitfield sneered about, the one with the metal detectors. She had loved it the way you love something you've bled for. She'd taught kids whose parents worked 3 jobs and kids who were raising themselves, and kids who walked past things on the way to school that no child should walk past. And she had gotten more of them to love a sentence. A poem. A paragraph of their own true words than any data sheet could measure. Then the district closed East Side budgets. Consolidation. The slow, quiet way that schools in certain neighborhoods get closed, and Camille Foster, 48 years old, found herself applying for jobs at 48 with the strange, bittersweet freedom of a woman starting over. Brookhaven had an opening. Brookhaven paid better. Brookhaven, she'd thought, might be easier. She unpacked her classroom the week before school started. Alone. On a Saturday. And the last thing she took out of the box was the thing she set on the corner of her desk where she would see it every day. It was a grade book, not a laptop, not a spreadsheet, an actual cloth-bound grade book. Old. Its spine held with tape. Its pages soft. It had belonged to her mother. Odessa Foster had taught in a 2-room schoolhouse in rural Alabama in the 1950s. In a building with a wood stove and a hand pump, and a county that spent $11 on each of her students for every 100 it spent on the white children across the road. She'd taught 40 kids across 6 grades with almost nothing. And she'd kept her records in that cloth-bound book. Every child's name in her small upright hand. And she had said a thing to her daughter so many times that Camille could hear it in her own pulse. You teach the child in front of you, not the parent behind them, not the principal over them, not the county that don't want to pay for them. The child. Every single child that walks in your door is somebody's whole entire world. And for the hours they're with you, they're yours. And your only job. Your only job. Camille is to see them. Most of them have never once in their life been truly seen by a grown person. You see them. That's the whole thing. Everything else is just paperwork. You teach the child in front of you. She'd seen what it cost her mother to mean it. She remembered being 9. Sitting in the back of that 2-room school on a day Odessa kept it open in a hard winter, when the county had told her not to bother, because 3 of her children walked 4 miles and would walk it whether the school was open or not. A man from the county had come by that afternoon, a school agent. Important. White. Impatient. And he'd stood in the doorway with his hat on and looked at Odessa. Foster, the way men like that looked, at women like her, and said the books she'd ordered weren't coming. The readers. The ones the children across the road had 3 of each. And that she ought to be grateful for what she had. And that, frankly, he didn't see the point in spending good money on, and he gestured at the room. At the children. And let it hang there. The way Margot Whitfield would let things hang in a doorway 40 years later. And Odessa had said, "Then we'll make our own readers." Sir, thank you for stopping. And after he left, she'd had the children write their own stories on the backs of old feed store paper and bound them with string. And those handmade books were the first things half those children ever owned that had their own words in them. Camille still had one. Made by Roy. Age oat. On the drive home that night, Camille had been furious times. He didn't even take his hat off. Mama. He looked at us like we were nothing times. and Odessa had driven the wagon a while and then said the thing. Baby. I wasn't teaching that man. I will never teach that man. He's not in my room. I'm teaching Roy. And Roy is 8. And Roy is somebody's whole entire world. And today Roy wrote a story and put his name on it. That man can keep his hat on his head all the way to his grave, for all it matters to Roy's story. You don't let the people in the doorway tell you what's happening in your room. The child in front of you is the only thing happening. You see the child, and you let the doorway be however the doorway's going to be. You teach the child in front of you. Odessa had died. The spring Camille got her own first classroom. And Camille had taken the grade book home from the house and carried it with her to every classroom since. 24 years. And set it on the corner of every desk. And when a day got hard, her hand would find it without her telling it to. She set it on the corner of the desk at Brookhaven on that Saturday, in a school full of children she didn't know yet. And on Monday morning she rang the small brass bell that had hung in her mother's schoolhouse. She rang it to start every class. A thing the Brookhaven kids found old-fashioned, and then, by October, secretly loved, and she started looking at the children in front of her. And by October she had seen Eli Whitfield, long before his mother had. That turned out to be the whole problem. And the whole story. Eli Whitfield was 12. And, on paper, he was the luckiest kid in the building. He had the big house on Crown Ridge, and the right last name, and a mother on the board, and a closet full of the right clothes. And he was, when Camille first met him in September, a bright, funny, quick kid who wrote with a wit that surprised her. And then, somewhere in early October, the lights in Eli Whitfield started going off one by one. And Camille Foster, who had spent 24 years learning to read the small weather of children, watched it happen and felt her stomach drop. He stopped raising his hand. He'd been the kid with the joke, the quick answer. And then he wasn't. He started turning his essays in late, then incomplete, then not at all. He got quiet in that specific way that isn't peace, the way that's a kid making himself small. And one Tuesday, Camille went up to the second-floor stairwell on her free period to fetch something from the supply room, and found Eli Whitfield sitting on the cold steps alone with an uneaten lunch. In the place kids go when the cafeteria has become a country that's expelled them. She didn't make a thing of it. You never make a thing of it. That's the first rule. She just sat down a couple steps below him, not too close, and said, "This is my thinking spot too. Mind if I borrow it?" And they sat. And over a few weeks of borrowed stairwells, she learned the shape of it. The way you learn these things from a 12-year-old. Sideways. In pieces, that there was a group of boys. Boys, he used to be one of, and that something had turned the way it turns at that age for no reason, and every reason, and that they'd made him the joke now. Online and in the halls. In the cruel, inventive way of 12-year-old boys, and that he was ashamed. Bone-deep ashamed. In the way that makes a kid certain it's his fault, and certain he can't tell anyone. Least of all, the mother whose entire kingdom was built on the family being perfect. One Tuesday. A few steps up in the gray light of that stairwell, he'd said it as close to plain as he ever got. "Can I ask you something? Like, a real question?" Camille said sure. He was picking at the crust of a sandwich he wasn't going to eat. How come some people, like, everybody just decides they don't like them, and then it's like, that's just the rule now. And you didn't even do anything. And there's no way to make it not be the rule anymore. He'd looked at her sideways, asking for the thing I'm writing. "For the thing you're writing?" Camille said, gravely, giving him the cover he needed. "Well, I've been alive a long time, and here's the truest thing I know about that. When a group decides somebody doesn't matter, it is never, not one single time, about the person they decided that about. It's about them. It's about something scared and mean in them that needs a person to put it on. So a kid in a stairwell who thinks it's his fault, she'd looked at the wall, not at him. So he could hear it without having to hold her eyes. He's got it exactly backwards. He's the one thing in the whole story that didn't do anything wrong. Eli hadn't answered, but he'd stopped picking at the sandwich. And a minute later he'd said, very quietly, "That's good. I'm going to put that in." And he had, and his essays, Lord, his essays. Because Eli couldn't say it out loud. But Camille had assigned a personal narrative unit. And Eli Whitfield, who couldn't tell a soul, told the paper. He wrote a story about a character, they always say, a character, a boy who was slowly turning invisible, who'd wave at people and they'd look right through him. Until one day he realized he could stand in the middle of the cafeteria and scream and no one would turn around. He wrote it beautifully. He wrote it like a kid reaching a hand up out of water. The next one was worse. Quieter. A boy practicing how to take up less space, how to walk so his shoes didn't squeak, how to laugh at the joke before it landed on him, how to become so small that maybe being unseen would stop hurting and just become a thing he was. Camille read that one twice in her empty classroom after the buses left, and she sat with it a long time. Because she'd been teaching 24 years, and she knew the difference between a sad story and a flare fired up off a sinking boat. And this was the second thing. Camille did everything right and everything quiet. She did not humiliate him. She did not announce it. She wrote on that essay, in her mother's red pen. This is some of the truest writing I've seen from a student all year. The boy in this story is not invisible to everyone. I see him. Come talk to me whenever you want. C. F. She looped in the counselor. Ms. Reyes. Carefully. The right way. The confidential way. She kept an eye on the stairwell. She gave a hurting kid a soft place and his dignity. Both. And she did it without ever once making him a project or a headline. And his grades, in the middle of all that, slipped to a C-, because a drowning child does not do his homework. And Camille had been about to reach out to his mother gently. The right way to say times, I think Eli might be having a hard time. Can we talk? When his mother came in first, swinging, to tell Camille Foster that the problem was Camille Foster. You see the trap now. You see the whole terrible architecture of it. The one adult in Brookhaven who had actually seen Margot Whitfield's son was the one Margot Whitfield walked in to destroy. And the only thing that could have saved the teacher times your son is being bullied. Your son is drowning. Your son wrote me a story about disappearing times, was the one thing the teacher would not say. Because to say it, to use that boy's secret pain as a shield in a fight with his own mother, in that mood, would have been a betrayal. Camille Foster was simply not capable of Odessa's voice. You teach the child in front of you, not the parent, even when the parent is standing on your throat. So she took it. You heard her take it. My son is perfect. The only problem in this classroom is you. Let me stop here. I have to. This woman walked into the one room in that whole rich town where her son had been seen and held and protected. And she looked at the woman who'd done the seeing and holding and protecting, and called her a fraud, a diversity hire, somebody who didn't belong over a Times grade, over a C- that was, if she'd only had eyes to read it, the loudest cry for help her child had ever made, and the teacher, who could have ended it with one sentence. Ate the contempt to keep faith with a 12-year-old. Tell me honest, could you have held that? Could you have stood there and taken times people like you, times and times, not the right fit, times and swallowed the one true thing that would have saved you? Because saying it would have cost a child something? Hold that. Because Margot Whitfield was just getting started. It did not stop at the classroom. Cruelty, like Margot Whitfield's, never stops at the first room. It has resources, and it spends them. She made the calls she'd promised. She called the superintendent. She did have his cell number, and she called 2 other board members. And she called the kind of parents who run the booster club and the group chats. And within a week, the story going around Brookhaven was not times a struggling boy and a teacher who saw him. The story going around was times that new English teacher, you know the one. There are real questions about her qualifications. Margot looked into it. Apparently, her last school was a disaster. Apparently, there were issues. There were no issues. There were 24 spotless years. But a lie with money behind it travels first class. And the truth was still lacing up its boots. And it stayed personal. 2. Because that's the thing about cruelty. With money behind it, it can afford to be both strategic and petty. Margot caught Camille in the school parking lot one gray afternoon. Pulled her big SUV up at an angle so Camille couldn't get to her car. And rolled the window down. And the warm, reasonable voice she used for the superintendent was nowhere in it. Now, I hope you're using this time to update your resume. I really do. Because I want you to understand something. Teacher, too, well, I want you to understand that I am not going to lose. People like me do not lose to people like you. That's just not how the world is built. And the sooner you accept that, the easier this goes for you. You could resign, quietly. Make this all go away. Get yourself back to wherever it is you'd actually be comfortable. Someplace with your kind of kids. Your kind of standards. Honestly, I'd consider that a kindness to everyone. Because if you make me do this the hard way, in front of the board, I will. And I'll enjoy it. And when it's over, there won't be a district in this state that'll touch you. Camille stood there with her bag on her shoulder and her keys in her hand, and the cold coming up off the asphalt. And she looked at this woman, and every single thing she needed to flatten her was sitting right there behind her teeth. Times your son cries in a stairwell. Margot, your son wrote me a story about disappearing. Your son is the reason for the grade, and you'd know that if you ever once looked at him instead of through him, times, and she held all of it. Because the boy's pain was the boy's, and she said only, quiet. I'm not going to resign, Mrs. Whitfield, and I'm not going to fight you the way you want me to either. You do whatever you feel you have to do. I'll be in my classroom in the morning. Same as always. And she waited, calm, until Margot thrown. Again. By getting no fight at all, finally hit the gas and pulled away. Camille felt it the way you feel weather change. Parents who'd nodded at her in the pickup line stopped nodding. A curriculum night she'd planned got postponed. Principal Doug Renner, 55. Decent enough underneath, but a man who'd survived 20 years in administration by never once standing between a donor and what the donor wanted called her into his office, and could not look at her while he did it. Camille, I want you to know I think you're a fine teacher. Look, this is a delicate community. The Whitfields are Margot is on the board. The family is very involved. The gem. You understand. She's filed a formal complaint, questioning your credentials. Your fitness. I have to take it to the board. My hands are tied. There's going to be a review. My credentials are in a box in my classroom. Doug, you can have them in 5 minutes. It's not really about the credentials, he said, miserably. And that was the truest thing he said. Because it never had been. No. Camille agreed. It isn't. The thing about a whisper campaign is that you hear the whispers. Camille walked into the faculty lounge that Thursday for the coffee she'd stopped enjoying. And two teachers at the table went quiet in the particular way that tells you they'd been talking about you. And one of them, a younger woman named Brett, who taught social studies and ran in the Booster Club circles, recovered by saying, too brightly, "Oh, Camille, we were just, how are you holding up?" With all the, you know, and didn't finish it. And the other one studied her phone. "I'm fine. Thank you," Camille said, and poured her coffee. "It's just so awkward." Brett went on, unable to leave it, the way some people can't, because she's per Margot. She basically runs the parent association, and people are saying, I'm not saying it. I'm just saying people are saying that maybe the hire was rushed, that maybe the district was under pressure to, diversify the staff, and they didn't really vet. She caught something in Camille's steady look and faltered. "I'm not saying I think that." "Then maybe don't say it," said a quiet voice from the corner. It was an older man, Hank Delgado, 31 years teaching science, a man who mostly kept to himself in his lab. He didn't look up from his crossword. "Margot Whitfield has been wrong about every teacher she's ever decided to hate, and she's hated about 9 of them, and not one of them turned out to be the problem. Leave the woman to drink her coffee." It wasn't much. It was, Camille noted, the only thing anyone in that building had said in her defense out loud, and even Hank said it to his crossword. But she gave him a small nod on the way out, and filed it away. There's almost always one. Usually just one. Usually too quiet. And too late. And still there's almost always one. She'd remember that. Later, when it counted, that in a building of 40 adults, the bravest defense of her had come from a man doing a crossword. And the bravest defense of all would come from a child of 12. Grown people are slow to stand up. That's not a thing the story made up. That's just a thing that's true. Here's the part that should have been the easy way out. And watch what she does with it. Ms. Reyes, the counselor, a good woman. An ally came to Camille privately and said, "Camille, you have to tell them about Eli. You have your notes. You have the referral. You have those essays. You tell the board times this is why his grade dipped. This is what's actually going on. I was protecting your member's son while she was trying to fire me times, and this is over." Today, they'll be falling over themselves to apologize. You'd be a Times hero. And Camille Foster looked at the counselor for a long moment and said, quietly, "And what happens to Eli when his mother and the superintendent and the whole board find out in a formal proceeding, on the record, that he's been crying in a stairwell and getting torn apart online and writing about disappearing? What happens to that boy who trusted me when I haul his worst secret into a board meeting to save my own job? He finds out the one grown-up who saw him traded him for a paycheck the second it got hard." She shook her head. Slow. "No. I'll defend myself with my record and my degrees in 24 years. I will not defend myself with that child. Find me another way. Marie, that door stays closed." Ms. Reyes looked at her like she was something rare. Because she was. You teach the child in front of you. Even when it cost you everything. Odessa never said that last part out loud. She didn't have to. Camille had watched her live it. 2 weeks of it. 2 weeks of a whisper campaign in a small, rich town, which is its own special kind of slow fire. And Margot Whitfield, who could have let the bureaucratic review grind quietly toward Camille's dismissal. Did the thing that people drunk on their own righteousness always do. She went for the public kill. She wanted it witnessed. She got the review item placed on the agenda of the next regular board meeting times open session. To the public part, and she papered the town to come. Concerned parents. A matter of our children's safety and the standards of this district. She wanted a crowded room. She wanted to be seen by everyone she'd spent her life impressing. Standing up for Brookhaven's precious standards and driving out the woman who didn't belong. She got her crowd. The boardroom was packed that Tuesday night. Every folding chair. People standing along the back wall. The 5 board members at their long table. Principal Renner sweating in a tie. Camille Foster sitting alone at a small table with a single folder. Her credentials. Her record. Her 24 years and not one word in it about a boy in a stairwell. Ms. Reyes, 2 rows back. Sick with it. And in the 3rd row, where his mother had told him to sit so the board could see what a fine, upstanding family was being failed by this teacher, sat Eli Whitfield, 12 years old, in a collared shirt, staring at his shoes. He hadn't wanted to come. Margot had made him come. You'll sit right up front, and you'll let them see you. Because this is about you. Baby. This is Mommy fixing what they did to you. He didn't know exactly what was happening. He only knew that his mother was about to do something to Ms. Foster. In front of everyone. And that Ms. Foster was the teacher who'd sat on the cold steps below him and said times, "This is my thinking spot too." The one who'd written times I see him times in red pen on the only true thing he'd ever written. The one grown-up in his whole shrinking world who had not looked right through him. The chairwoman opened the item. Margot Whitfield rose and walked to the microphone in the aisle past her son, her hand grazing his shoulder. "Watch how Mommy handles this times," and she began. And God. She was good at it. She was smooth and warm and reasonable for the cameras. A concerned mother. I take no pleasure in this. She talked about standards. She talked about the children. We are the number 4 district in this state, she said. And we did not become that by accident. And we do not stay that by being timid about who we put in front of our kids. She thanked the board for their time. She thanked the community for caring. And then, slowly, the knife came out. Because it always does. I want to be careful here, she said. Not careful at all. But I think this community deserves to know some things. This teacher came to us from a failed school, a school that was, frankly, closed for cause. It was closed for budget. She knew that. She said it anyway, and I have been told, by people I trust, that there were concerns there. Concerns that somehow didn't make it into the file. And I have to ask myself how a hire like that happens. And I think we all know the answer. Don't we? We all know that there are pressures these days to make certain kinds of hires, to check certain boxes, regardless of whether the person can actually do the job. And then a child like mine, an excellent student, a child from a home that puts education above everything suddenly can't get above a C in her classroom. And we're all supposed to just assume the problem is the gifted child and not the box-checking hire. She let it sit. She turned. Slightly. So the room could see her profile. The wronged mother. And then she said the line, the one that would be quoted in that town for years. The one that hung in the air like a struck match, looking right at Camille Foster across the room. My son is not the problem here. My son is times perfect. And I am not going to apologize for saying out loud what every parent in this room is thinking, which is that some people simply do not belong in a place like Brookhaven. And we all knew it the day she walked in. I think we all know Mom, stop. It wasn't loud. That's the thing people remembered after. How quiet it was. A 12-year-old's voice, cracking on the second word. But it cut through that whole packed room, like the brass bell at the start of class. Eli Whitfield was standing up in the third row. Eli, sit times down, Margot hissed, the microphone catching it. A flash of something raw and panicked under the polish. Honey, this is grown up. No. The boy's hands were shaking. He looked like he might be sick. But he'd stood up. And he'd found out the thing every kid finds out exactly once. Which is that standing up is the only hard part. And after you've done it, the words come. Your mom. You're up there saying Ms. Foster is the problem, and she's the only please just time stop. He turned. Not to his mother now, but to the long table. To the 5 board members. Because some instinct told him they were the ones who decided things. Can I say something? Am I allowed? It's about me. So, the chairwoman, a grandmother named Pat Osei, who had been on that board for 19 years and had never seen anything like it, leaned to her microphone and said, gently, go ahead. Young man, take your time. And Eli Whitfield told the room the truth. Not all of it, he was 12. And it came out crooked and incomplete and devastating. The way truth comes out of children. He told them his grade went down because he stopped doing his work. He told them he stopped doing his work because he'd been having a really bad couple months. He told them, in the smallest voice, eyes streaming now but his chin up, that some kids had been doing stuff to him, that he'd been eating lunch by himself in the stairwell since October, that he hadn't told anybody, that he didn't want anybody to know, especially, his voice broke clean, in half here, especially, not his mom. Because she thought everything was perfect and he didn't want to be the thing that wasn't. And Ms. Foster found me, he said, on the stairs. And she didn't make it weird and she didn't tell anybody and she sat with me a bunch of times. And she wrote on my paper that she saw me, that I wasn't invisible. He looked at his mother now. Finally, this small shaking boy looking at the powerful woman at the microphone who had gone the color of the wall. She's the only one who saw me. Mom, for months. And you're trying to get her times fired. So please stop. You're getting it wrong. You're getting all of it wrong. You could have heard a pin drop in that room. You could have heard a tear land. 200 people. And not one of them breathing. And Margot Whitfield standing at the microphone she had demanded. In the spotlight she had built. Holding a speech about standards. While her own son stood 12 feet away and told the entire town that the woman she was destroying was the only adult who had loved him when he was drowning. And Camille Foster, at her little table, with her folder of credentials she would now never need to open, did the only thing she had ever wanted to do in any of it. She didn't look at Margot. She didn't look at the board. She got up, quietly, and she crossed to the third row, and she knelt down next to a crying 12-year-old boy. And she said, "Lo, just for him," the way she'd said it on the cold steps. Hey, that was the bravest thing I've seen anybody do in this building all year. I've got you. You did so good. I've got you. That's the whole turn. No gotcha. No triumph. A woman who'd been called a fraud. In the moment, she was finally proven right in front of everyone. Spent it kneeling on the floor to comfort the child of the woman who'd tried to ruin her. Now let me give you the reckoning. Person by person. Because justice you don't itemize is just a feeling. And this one had real weight to it, even though almost none of it was loud. Margot Whitfield. There was no firing for Margot. No charge. No headline calling her a villain. That's not how it works for people with their name on the gym. Her reckoning was the other kind. The kind that detonates in the quiet and keeps going off for years. Start with the public part, because Margot had always lived for the public part. She had filled a room with the entire community she'd spent her life trying to impress. And that entire community had just watched her, live. Try to destroy a beloved teacher while ignoring her own son so completely that the boy had to announce his months of suffering into a microphone because his mother had never once asked. The thing Margot Whitfield protected above all else, the image. The perfect family. The standing was the exact thing that died in that room, by her own hand, with her son's voice as the instrument. She withdrew the complaint that night. Of course, in a small voice. The polish all gone. But you cannot withdraw a thing 200 people watched. For months afterward, the pickup line went quiet when her car pulled up. The group chats she used to run went on without her. She had wanted to be seen standing up for Brookhaven's standards. And instead, the whole town had seen exactly what her standards had cost the one child she was supposed to love most. There's a kind of poetic justice that needs no judge. She built the stage. She packed the seats. She stood in the light. And she handed her own son the truth to say out loud. Nobody did that to Margot Whitfield. Margot Whitfield did all of it to herself. But, and this matters, because the story is not only about her downfall. Something cracked open in that woman that night. And through the crack, eventually, came the only good thing she'd done in the whole story. She took Eli home. And for the first time in his life, she listened, really listened, for hours. The polish gone, both of them crying at the kitchen island. She pulled him out of the orbit of those boys. She got him into counseling, real counseling, not image management. And she did one more thing. Months later, that I'll save for the end. Because it's the hinge. The whole lesson turns on. Principal Doug Renner, Doug, who'd told Camille his hands were tied, found in the aftermath that his hands had been untied by a 12-year-old. And to his credit, late, but real, he used them. He stood up at the end of that meeting, in front of the board and the cameras, and he said, his voice unsteady, I want to say something. And I should have said it 2 weeks ago. Camille Foster is one of the finest teachers I have ever supervised. And I let a powerful parent make me forget that. And I'm ashamed of it. I'm sorry. Camille. In front of everybody. Because I failed you in front of everybody. It didn't undo it. But it was the spine he'd been missing for 20 years. And he stood a little straighter at Brookhaven after that. And a few teachers noticed that the next time a donor came swinging, Doug Renner did not so quickly tie his own hands. The Whisper Network. The same town machinery that had spent 2 weeks carrying a rich woman's lie at first-class speed now had to carry the truth. And small towns, whatever their sins, do eventually love a teacher who knelt on the floor for a crying kid. The parents who'd stopped nodding started nodding again. Then started apologizing. Then started requesting her class. By spring, there was a wait list for 7th grade English. The certifications stayed in the box. She never did hang them. She didn't need a wall to tell anybody what she was. The town had found out the hard way. The board. And something larger. The superintendent who'd taken Margot's cell calls, who'd let a donor's grudge become a formal review, without ever once asking the simple question, is this true times, found that the room had a long memory about who'd been willing to put a 24-year teacher on trial because a board member was embarrassed by a report card. Pat Oze, the chairwoman, was not embarrassed at all. She was furious. in the slow, steady way of a 19-year veteran who'd seen power try to eat decency before. 2 weeks later, she put 2 items on the agenda herself. The first created a rule that no personnel complaint from a board member could trigger a review without an independent check of the underlying facts. First, a small bureaucratic thing that the local paper barely covered. And that quietly made it a great deal harder for the next Margot to do to the next Camille what had nearly been done here. The second was bigger and had Eli's fingerprints all over it, though his name was never on it. A real anti-bullying and student wellness program. The kind with trained counselors and confidential reporting and actual teeth, born directly out of the fact that a 12-year-old in the number 4 district in the state had been drowning in plain sight for 4 months, and the only person who'd noticed was the teacher they'd tried to fire for it. They named the wellness room, eventually, the stairwell. People who didn't know the story thought it was a strange name for a room. People who did know it couldn't walk past the little brass plaque without something catching in their throat. Eli Whitfield. And here's the part I actually care about, more than any of it. Eli got better. Not overnight, that's not how it goes, but he got better. Because the dam had broken, and the secret was out, and the shame had been said out loud and survived. And because his mother finally saw him, and because a teacher kept ringing a brass bell every morning in a room where he knew, for certain now, that he was not invisible. He started raising his hand again by spring. He started eating in the cafeteria again, at a new table, with a couple of the quiet kids he'd never have noticed before October, because he'd learned in the worst way what it costs to be unseen, and he'd decided, the way kids do when they've been through the fire, that he was going to be a kid who saw people. Let me tell you the part that came after. Because the comeuppance isn't the point of a story like this. The point is what's left standing when the comeuppance is over. What was left standing was a refrain, passed hand to hand. You teach the child in front of you. Every child is somebody's whole world. You see them. It had come from a woman in a 2-room Alabama schoolhouse who spent her life being told her children weren't worth $11. And it had come down through her daughter to a room full of the most privileged children in the state. And it had landed, of all places, in a boy named Eli Whitfield, who had been the most privileged of them all and the most invisible, and who carried it out the door into the rest of his life. Here's the hinge I told you I'd save. Margot Whitfield months later. In the spring, when the worst of her own reckoning had burned down to embers and something humbler had grown in the ash, Margot did a thing. She didn't apologize to Camille in public. She couldn't. The way some people simply cannot make their mouth form those words. But she came to the classroom one afternoon, alone, after the kids had gone. And she stood in the doorway of the room she'd stormed into 2 months before, and she put an envelope on the corner of the desk, next to the old cloth-grade book she didn't know the history of. And she said, not quite able to meet Camille's eyes, I don't have the right to ask you for anything. I know that. But there's a scholarship fund the Booster Club runs for kids whose schools closed. Kids coming in from the city schools, like the one you came from. It wasn't much. I made it a lot. And I told them it had to be administered by a teacher the kids actually trust. And I told them there was only one teacher in this building who fit that. And I gave them your name. She finally looked up. That's all. I don't know how to say the other thing. But I wanted you to have your name on something good in this town, since I'm the one who put it on something ugly. And she left before Camille could answer, which was its own kind of mercy. For both of them, Camille Foster ran that fund for the next 11 years. Dozens of kids, from closed schools, kids with metal detector pasts and first-class minds, came through Brookhaven with a little money and a teacher in their corner who'd been exactly where they'd been, The lesson didn't just survive. It multiplied. It paid forward. Out of the pocket of the woman who'd started the whole thing trying to tear it down, which is about the most poetic shape that grace can take. And Eli Whitfield is 24 now. He went into teaching. Of course he did. He teaches middle school English in a district that is nothing like Brookhaven. The kind of school with the metal detectors. The kind his mother once sneered about. And he is, by every account, the kind of teacher who finds the kid in the stairwell. He keeps a thing on the corner of his desk. Camille gave it to him at his graduation. The brass bell from a 2-room Alabama schoolhouse. Because she had no children of her own to leave it to, and because she'd decided, long ago, that you give the bell to whoever you catch, ringing it in their heart. He rings it to start every class. The kids think it's old-fashioned. By October, they secretly love it. The first thing he tells every new student, on the first day, before the books, he writes one sentence on the board and reads it out loud, in this room. You are not invisible. And some kid in the back, some quiet kid making himself small, looks up, and Eli Whitfield looks right at him, the way a teacher once looked at him, and thinks, there you are. I see you. And that's the whole thing. Everything else is just paperwork. He told the story once, the whole story. The board meeting. The stairwell. His mother. All of it to a room of new teachers at an induction his district ran, because they'd asked him to talk about why he taught where he taught. He kept it together until the part about standing up in the 3rd row. And then he had to stop for a second. A grown man at a podium. And when he found his voice again, he said the thing that he said was the only piece of advice he'd ever give anybody about the job. You're going to get parents in your doorway who've already decided who you are. You're going to get told your hands are tied, that the family's important, that you should let it go. And somewhere in your building, every single year, there is going to be a kid in a stairwell. The whole job, the entire job. Everything else is paperwork is climbing the stairs. The teacher who climbed the stairs for me got called a fraud by my own mother in front of our whole town, and she took it for months, rather than spend my secret to save herself. And then she knelt down on the floor of that boardroom and told me I was brave when I was the one who owed times, her times, everything. I have spent my whole life trying to be worth what she did. I will never get all the way there. You should spend your whole life trying too. Then he'd held up a small brass bell and rung it once and said, and if anybody knows where to get readers for a classroom on no budget, my grandmother apparently used to make her own out of feed store paper. I've been meaning to learn how. He didn't know it was Odessa's line he was reaching for. 2 generations and 100 years downstream. Camille had never told him that part. He just had it now. The way you have a thing that's been handed all the way down a line to land. Finally, exactly where it was always going. Let me take you back to that classroom. Same room, same corner desk. Same old grade book held together with tape. Same brass bell, well, a different bell now. The old one's 2 districts away in a school with metal detectors, ringing in a younger man's hand. But the new one rings the same. And the woman standing behind the desk is Camille Foster. Older now. Near the end of a long career. And there's a parent in the doorway. There's always a parent in the doorway, except this one isn't swinging. This one is a nervous young mother whose daughter just transferred in from a school that closed. Who's heard that this teacher is the one you want. Who came to say thank you before she'd even worked out what for. Same doorway where a powerful woman once stood and said, "Times the only problem in this classroom is you." Same desk. Same bell. Same teacher. Everything else. Different. Camille smiled at the nervous young mother, and she said the thing she always said, The thing her own mother said in a schoolhouse with a wood stove 70 years ago. The thing that had outlived a closed school and a whisper campaign and a packed boardroom and a powerful woman's worst night. The thing that would outlive Camille Foster herself in a brass bell 2 districts over. Don't you worry about a thing. I see her. For the hours she's with me, she's mine. And I'm going to see her. She set her hand on the corner of the old grade book without even noticing she'd done it. You teach the child in front of you. That's the whole job. Now tell me about your girl. You teach the child in front of you. Every child is somebody's whole world. You see them. Okay, real talk. Before you go, a woman walked into the one room where her son had finally been seen, and she called the woman who saw him a fraud over a C-. A C- that was the loudest cry for help a drowning kid had ever managed to make. And his own mother read it as an insult to the family name. And the teacher could have ended it in one sentence. Could have saved her whole career by just Times, saying, "Times what was wrong with that boy." And she ate 2 weeks of humiliation and a public trial instead. Because she would not spend a child to save herself. She'd rather lose the job than break faith with a 12-year-old. Think about that. Think about whether you've ever once protected somebody weaker than you when it would have been so. So easy and so justified to throw them under the bus to save your own skin. So, let me ask you straight, the way she'd want me to. There were 200 people in that boardroom. And for 2 weeks, there'd been a whole town carrying a rich woman's lie because it was easier than checking it. Be honest with yourself. When the powerful person in your world goes after somebody who can't fight back and everybody around you is nodding along because the powerful person signs the checks, are you the one who stands up in the 3rd row? Or do you stare at your shoes and hope it works out? It took a frightened 12-year-old to do what 200 grown adults wouldn't. Would you have needed a child to go first? Tell me down in the comments. I read them. And if this one got you, if you believe that the most important thing one person can do for another is simply to times see, times them, and that the bravest thing in any room is usually the quietest, do me a favor. Hit like, share it with a teacher who saw you once, and subscribe. Because that's the whole heart of this channel. What happens when people decide, before they've bothered to look, that they already know who matters and who doesn't. And they're wrong. They're always wrong. There's always a kid in the stairwell. The only question is whether you're the kind of person who climbs the stairs.